The fluorescent lights above the children's ward buzzed incessantly, casting harsh shadows across the linoleum floor as I hurried toward the exit. My sneakers squeaked against the polished surface with each step, a sound that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat over the past 18 months. The smell of antiseptic and floor cleaner clung to my scrubs, but beneath it lingered something sweeter. The strawberry shampoo I'd used to wash Lucas's hair this morning before his chemotherapy session. 11 hours. That's how long my shift had been today, and my feet screamed in protest as I pushed through the heavy glass doors into the Brooklyn night. The cool October air hit my face like a slap, carrying with it the scent of exhaust fumes and something that might have been rain. I pulled my worn cardigan tighter around my shoulders, the fabric thin from too many washes, but still soft against my skin. The parking garage stretched before me, dimly lit and mostly empty at this hour. My Honda Civic sat in the same spot where I'd left it that morning, looking as tired as I felt. As I fumbled for my keys, my phone buzzed against my hip. A text message. My heart clenched as I recognized the number, one I'd been dreading to see. Time's up, nurse. $43,000. Tonight, you know what happens if you don't pay. My hands trembled as I read the words again, each digit of that impossible sum burning itself into my retinas. $43,000. The cost of keeping my 5-year-old son alive reduced to numbers on a screen that might as well have been asking for the moon. I leaned against my car, the metal cold even through my scrubs, and closed my eyes. How had it come to this? Lucas's leukemia diagnosis had shattered our world into before and after. And the after had been nothing but a relentless march through specialists and treatments and insurance claims that covered exactly 60% of everything. The other 40% had fallen on my shoulders like stones, each one heavier than the last. When the medical bills started piling up and the bank refused my loan application for the third time, I'd made a choice that haunted my sleep. Vince Caruso and his men weren't the kind of people you borrowed money from if you had any other option. But watching her child fade away while doctors talked about experimental treatments that cost more than most people's houses had a way of making desperate choices seem reasonable. Mommy, are the bad men going to come to our house again? Lucas had asked me just 2 weeks ago. His green eyes so much like mine, wide with the kind of fear number 5-year-old should carry. I'd smoothed his dark hair and promised him they wouldn't, but we both knew I was lying. Another buzz, another text. Corner of 5th and Industrial, 1 hour, come alone, Industrial District. Even the name sounded ominous. It was the part of Brooklyn where legitimate businesses went to die, replaced by warehouses and auto shops that stayed open too late and asked too few questions. Not the kind of place a 26-year-old pediatric nurse should be walking around at 11:30 at night. But what choice did I have? The late shift at the hospital paid time and a half. And every dollar mattered when you owed money to men who collected debts with baseball bats and tire irons. Mrs. Chun from 4B was watching Lucas tonight like she had so many other nights. Her kind eyes never judging me for the hours I kept or the shadows under my eyes that makeup couldn't hide anymore. I started the car, the engine coughing to life with a sound that reminded me it needed maintenance I couldn't afford. The radio crackled with static as I pulled out of the parking garage, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red as my eyes filled with unshed tears. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I needed to be strong, needed to find a way to negotiate with Vince. Maybe buy myself another week or two. The streets grew darker as I drove deeper into the industrial district. Legitimate businesses giving way to shuttered storefronts and buildings that looked like they were held together by graffiti and stubbornness. My GPS directed me through a maze of narrow streets that seemed designed to swallow people whole, each turn taking me further from safety and deeper into a world I didn't belong in. 5th and Industrial turned out to be a corner dominated by a chain-link fence and the kind of street light that flickered more than it illuminated. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. 3 men stood in the shadows cast by a brick building, their cigarettes glowing like orange eyes in the darkness. Vince Caruso was easy to spot, tall and lean with thinning hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. The two men flanking him were broader, built like refrigerators with faces to match. I'd seen them before during previous negotiations that had ended with me promising money I didn't have and them promising consequences I didn't want to think about. My phone buzzed again. Get out of the car. I took a deep breath, tasting fear on my tongue like copper pennies, and opened the door. The street was quieter than a cemetery. The only sound the distant hum of traffic from the highway and the click of my footsteps on broken asphalt. As I crossed the street, I could see Vince's smile widening, and everything inside me screamed to run. Sofia Martinez, he said, my name sounding like a curse in his mouth. Right on time. You always were punctual. I need more time, I said, hating how small my voice sounded in the vast emptiness of the street. Lucas is responding well to treatment, but the insurance. Save it. One of his men interrupted, stepping closer. I could smell cigarettes and something else on his breath. Something sharp and medicinal. Boss doesn't want to hear about your kid's problems anymore. Vince held up a hand, and the man stepped back immediately. Now, Tommy, let's be civilized here. Sofia is a good customer, always polite. Always tries to pay something. His eyes met mine. Cold and calculating. But good intentions don't pay for my time, sweetheart. And my time is expensive. I can give you $2,000 now, I said, my voice steadying slightly. It was every dollar in my savings account, money I'd been hoarding for Lucas's next round of treatments. And another $1,000 next week. 41,000 short, the third man said, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. That's insulting. The word hung in the air, between us like a threat. I watched as Vince's expression shifted, the practiced patience melting away to reveal something hungrier underneath. Something that made my skin crawl and my heart hammer against my ribs. You know what I think, Sofia?
Vince stepped closer.
Close enough that I could see the gold in his front tooth when he smiled. I think you're not taking this seriously. I think you believe this is some kind of charity case, and we're going to keep extending deadlines out of the goodness of our hearts. That's not I started, but he cut me off with a gesture. Tommy, explain to the nurse what happens to people who don't take us seriously. Tommy cracked his knuckles. The sound sharp as gunshots in the quiet street. Well, boss, sometimes people have accidents, trip down some stairs, walk into doors. Real clumsy like. And sometimes, the third man added, his smile revealing teeth that had seen better days. Accidents happen to people they care about. Kids are so fragile. Hospital security can't be everywhere. The threat hit me like ice water in my veins. Lucas. They were talking about Lucas. No, I whispered then louder. No, you can't. Can't what? Vince's voice was soft, almost gentle. I can't collect what's owed to us. Can't make sure our investments are protected. You came to us, remember? You begged us for help when the banks turned you away.
He was right.
I had begged, gotten on my knees in this very neighborhood, and pleaded for the money that would give my son a fighting chance. And now that same money was a noose around both our necks.
Run.
The word came from somewhere deep in my chest. Some primal part of me that recognized predators when they circled. I turned and ran, my sneakers slapping against asphalt as Vince's laughter followed me into the darkness. Behind me, I could hear footsteps, heavy and unhurried. They knew these streets better than I did. They knew there was nowhere to go. I rounded a corner and slammed into something solid, a chest that felt like a brick wall. Strong hands gripped my shoulders, steadying me as I stumbled backward, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Please, I gasped, looking up at the stranger who'd caught me. Please, they're going to hurt my son. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows that were definitely not mine. The bed beneath me was softer than anything I'd ever slept on. The sheets Egyptian cotton with a thread count that probably cost more than my monthly rent. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, letting my eyes adjust to the unfamiliar surroundings, while my mind struggled to piece together how I'd gotten here. The events of the previous night came flooding back in fragments, running from Vince and his men, colliding with a stranger outside that warehouse. The way those three predators had simply vanished when he'd stepped into the light. Alejandro. Even his name felt dangerous on my tongue. I sat up slowly, taking in the guest room that looked like something from a magazine spread. Cream walls adorned with what appeared to be original artwork, a sitting area with furniture that whispered of quiet wealth, and windows that overlooked manicured grounds that seemed to stretch forever. This wasn't just money. This was power. A soft knock interrupted my assessment. Miss Martinez, Mr. Treddy would like to see you in his study. The woman who entered was middle-aged with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a perfect shin. Her black dress was simple but elegant, and she carried herself with the authority of someone who ran this household with military precision. A housekeeper, but not the kind who cleaned toilets. This woman managed an empire. "I need to get home to my son," I said, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. "Mrs. Chun is watching him, but she'll be worried if I don't." "Mr. Treddy has already arranged for your son to be cared for," she interrupted smoothly. "A nurse is with him now. Someone from your hospital's pediatric ward. Mrs. Chun has been compensated for her inconvenience." My blood turned to ice. How does he know about Lucas? How does he know about Mrs. Chun? The woman's expression didn't change. "Mr. Treddy likes to be thorough. There are clothes in the closet that should fit you. Breakfast is waiting in the study." She left before I could ask any more questions, the door closing behind her with a soft click that sounded final. I stumbled to the window, pressing my palms against the glass as I stared out at gardens that belonged in Versailles. Where was I? How long had I been here? The closet she'd mentioned contained an array of women's clothing, all in my size, all with designer labels that made my eyes water. I selected the most conservative option I could find, a pair of dark jeans and a cream sweater that probably cost more than I made in a week, and tried not to think about how he knew my measurements. The hallway outside my room was a study in understated elegance. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the walls were lined with paintings that looked like they belonged in museums. My footsteps echoed despite my best efforts to walk quietly, the sound announcing my presence to anyone who might be listening. I found the study by following the scent of coffee and something that smelled like fresh pastries. The door was already open, and Alejandro Treddy stood with his back to me, gazing out a floor-to-ceiling window while speaking quietly into a phone. In daylight, he was even more imposing than he'd seemed in the shadowy warehouse district. He was tall, easily 6 feet 3 inches, with the kind of build that came from discipline rather than genetics. His black hair was perfectly styled, and even from behind, I could see the expensive cut of his charcoal suit. When he turned to acknowledge my presence, I was struck again by those eyes. Blue so dark they were almost navy, sharp and assessing in a face that could have been carved from marble. "Sophia," he said, ending his call with a word in what sounded like Italian. "I trust you slept well. Where is my son?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was past caring about politeness. "You had no right to ensure his safety." Alejandro gestured to a leather chair positioned across from his desk. "Please sit. We have much to discuss. I want to see Lucas now." Instead of responding, he opened a manila folder on his desk and began reading aloud. "Sophia Martinez, 26 years old, pediatric nurse at Brooklyn Children's Hospital for 4 years. Mother to Lucas Martinez, age 5, diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 18 months ago. Father unknown. Listed as such on the birth certificate." My mouth went dry. "Stop. You live in a 1-bedroom apartment on Maple Street. Rent $1,400 monthly. Currently 2 months behind. Your son receives chemotherapy every Thursday at 9 a.m., covered partially by your hospital insurance. The remaining $43,000 in medical expenses led you to borrow money from Vincent Caruso at 30% interest." He looked up from the file, those unsettling eyes meeting mine. "Shall I continue? How do you know all this?" I whispered. "I make it my business to know everything about people who enter my life," he said simply. "Even accidentally." A silver tray sat on a side table laden with coffee, fresh fruit, and pastries that looked like they'd been crafted by angels. My stomach growled audibly. I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but I ignored it. "What do you want from me?" Alejandro closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, studying me with the intensity of a scientist examining a fascinating specimen. Your debt to Vincent Caruso has been paid in full as of 6 a.m. this morning. He and his associates will not be contacting you again. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. $43,000. Nobody, just I did. He stood and walked to a bar cart in the corner, pouring amber liquid into a crystal glass despite the early hour. Consider it an investment. In what?
In you.
He took a sip of what smelled like very expensive whiskey and returned to his position behind the desk. I have need of someone with your particular skills, Miss Martinez. Medical training, discretion, and most importantly, no connections to my usual circle of associates. Understanding dawned like ice water in my veins. You want me to be your personal nurse for when your people get hurt and can't go to hospitals, among other things. His smile was slight but genuine. You would be well compensated, of course. $50,000 per month, plus full medical coverage for both you and Lucas. The best specialists, the most advanced treatments available anywhere in the country. $50,000. The number echoed in my head like a gunshot. In a year, I could save enough to never have to worry about Lucas's medical bills again. In 2 years, I could give him everything he'd never had. Security, education, a future that wasn't constantly threatened by bankruptcy. What would I have to do? I asked, hating myself for even considering it. Provide medical care when needed. Accompany me to certain social functions when appropriate. Live here in this house where you and Lucas would be completely safe. Live here? I looked around the opulent study, at the paintings worth more than most people's houses. At the man who commanded enough respect to make loan sharks disappear with a phone call. As what? Your employee? Your prisoner? As someone under my protection, he said quietly. The world I inhabit is dangerous, Sophia. By accepting my help last night, you've already become part of it. The question now is whether you'll be an active participant or a vulnerable bystander. I thought about Lucas, about the way he'd looked so small in his hospital bed yesterday morning, pale and thin, but still trying to smile for me. I thought about the stack of bills on my kitchen table, the calls from collection agencies, the constant fear that had been my companion for 18 months. And if I refuse, Alejandro Unk's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Then you're free to leave. Your debt is already paid. Consider it a gift, but I can't guarantee your safety once you walk out that door. Vincent Caruso may have been dealt with, but word spreads quickly in certain circles. Others will see opportunity where I saw necessity. The threat was delivered with such casual elegance that it took me a moment to recognize it for what it was. This wasn't really a choice at all. It was an ultimatum wrapped in silk and tied with a golden ribbon. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course. He walked to the door and opened it, signaling that our conversation was over. Take all the time you need. Your son is being well cared for, and you're welcome to call him whenever you'd like. Mrs. Romano will show you around the grounds. As I stood to leave, he spoke again, his voice softer. Sophia, the men who threatened your child last night will never trouble you again. That much I can promise you. I paused at the threshold, looking back at him. Why are you doing this? Really? For a long moment, he was silent. Then, quietly, because I understand what it means to fight for family, and because I recognize strength when I see it, even when it's wrapped in desperation. The door closed behind me with a soft click, leaving me alone in the hallway with the weight of an impossible decision and the growing certainty that my life had just changed forever. 3 days. That's how long I'd been living in Alejandro Tourette's mansion. And I still felt like an imposter every time I walked down those marble hallways. The guest suite had become my temporary prison, decorated in soft blues and creams that should have been soothing, but only reminded me that I was living in a gilded cage. I'd spoken to Lucas twice each day, always with Mrs. Romano standing discreetly nearby, always with the knowledge that my conversations were being monitored. He sounded good, better than he had in weeks. The private nurse Alessandro had arranged was apparently some kind of miracle worker, keeping Lucas engaged with educational games while managing his medication schedule with military precision. Mommy, when are you coming home? He'd asked during our morning call, his 5-year-old voice carrying that particular blend of confusion and loneliness that made my chest ache. "Soon, sweetheart," I'd lied, staring out at gardens that probably cost more to maintain than my annual salary. "Mommy's just taking care of some work things." Now, as evening painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, I found myself in the mansion's library, a room that belonged in an Ivy League university rather than someone's private home. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of volumes, many of them first editions that probably cost more than most people's cars. I'd been hiding here for hours, trying to lose myself in medical journals while avoiding the man who owned this place. Interesting reading. Alejandro Unc's voice made me jump, the journals slipping from my hands and clattering to the floor. He stood in the doorway, having somehow entered without making a sound despite his size. He'd changed since morning. Gone was the formal business suit, replaced by dark jeans and a black sweater that clung to his frame in ways that made it difficult to concentrate. "Just catching up on recent research," I said, bending to retrieve the fallen journal. "Pediatric oncology advances." He moved into the room with that predatory grace I was beginning to recognize, settling into the leather armchair across from my reading nook. "For Lucas," I nodded, not trusting my voice. The way he said my son's name with genuine concern rather than the calculating tone he used for business did something strange to my insides. "The nurses report he's responding well to the adjusted medication protocol," Alejandro continued, accepting a glass of wine from Mrs. Romano, who had appeared as silently as he had. "Dr. Chun believes the new treatment combination shows significant promise." My head snapped up.
Dr.
Chun, as in Dr. Patricia Chun from Memorial Sloan Kettering, you know her reputation. I stared at him in shock.
Dr.
Chun was one of the foremost pediatric oncologists in the country. Getting an appointment with her usually required waiting lists measured in months, connections I could never hope to have, and insurance approvals that were nearly impossible to obtain.
"How?"
I whispered. "I made a phone call." He sipped his wine, watching my reaction over the rim of his glass. "She's been consulting on Lucas's case since yesterday. Pro bono as a favor to a mutual acquaintance." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You can't keep doing this, throwing money around, pulling strings, trying to buy my compliance with expensive favors. Is that what you think this is?" Alejandro leaned forward, his dark blue eyes intense. "An attempt to purchase your cooperation, isn't it?" I stood abruptly, pacing to the window where I could see security guards patrolling the perimeter like well-dressed sentries. "The debt payment, the specialist, this house. It's all designed to make me dependent on you. You already were dependent, Sophia. The only difference is that now your dependence ensures your son receives the best care possible rather than whatever scraps your insurance company deigns to provide." I whirled to face him, anger flaring hot in my chest. I was managing fine on my own.
"Were you?"
He stood as well, closing the distance between us in 3 long strides, borrowing money from loan sharks, working double shifts while your child underwent chemotherapy, lying awake at night, wondering if you'd lose your apartment before you could save his life. Each word hit like a physical blow because they were true. Every single one of them. "That was my choice to make," I said through gritted teeth. "And this is mine." He was close enough now that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and masculine that made my treacherous body respond in ways it shouldn't. "I choose to help. I choose to provide resources that you need. I choose to protect both you and Lucas from the wolves circling outside these walls."
"Why?"
The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. So, why are you doing this?" For a long moment, he was silent, studying my face as if memorizing every detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than I'd ever heard it because I understand what it means to lose everything that matters. He turned away, moving to the fireplace where flames cast dancing shadows across his features. "I was 16 when my parents were killed. Car bomb planted by the Kaczynski family during a territorial dispute that had been simmering for years. My anger deflated like a punctured balloon, replaced by something that felt uncomfortably like sympathy. I came home from school to find police cars in our driveway and neighbors whispering behind their curtains. He stared into the fire, lost in memories that clearly still haunted him. My father had been building something legitimate, trying to transition our family's interests away from the old ways. The Kaczynskis saw that as weakness. Alejandro. I started, but he held up a hand. I spent the next 18 years building an empire strong enough to ensure that what happened to my parents could never happen to anyone under my protection. Again. And I learned that sometimes the only way to save someone is to make choices they're not ready to make themselves. He looked at me then, and I saw something in those dark blue eyes that made my breath catch. Pain, yes, but also a fierce determination that was both beautiful and terrifying. You remind me of him, he continued quietly. My father, the way you fight for Lucas, the sacrifices you make without complaint, the strength you show even when you're breaking apart inside. I recognize that kind of love because I watched it destroy and rebuild a man who was trying to create something better for his family. The admission hung in the air between us like a bridge neither of us was quite ready to cross. I should check on Lucas, I said finally, not trusting myself to respond to the vulnerability he'd just shown me. Of course. He moved to his desk, retrieving a small wrapped package. This came for you today. I took the package with trembling fingers, recognizing the childish scroll of my son's handwriting on the brown paper. Inside was a drawing. Stick figures of a woman and a small boy holding hands under a rainbow with "I love you, Mommy," written in crayon across the top. He asked the nurse to help him mail it. Alejandro said softly. Apparently, he wanted to make sure you knew he was thinking about you. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over, hot tracks down my cheeks as I clutched Lucas's artwork to my chest. This man, this dangerous, powerful man who could end lives with a phone call, had ensured that a 5-year-old's gesture of love reached his mother when she needed it most. Thank you, I whispered. When I looked up, Alessandra was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Something intense and possessive, but also tender in a way that made my heart stutter. Sophia, he said, my name sounding like a prayer on his lips. There's something else we need to discuss. Before I could ask what he meant, Mrs. Romano appeared in the doorway, her usually composed expression tight with concern. Sir, there's been a development. Tommy called from the warehouse. Someone's been asking questions about Miss Martinez and her son. The warmth that had been building between Alessandro and me vanished instantly, replaced by the cold professionalism I'd seen that first night. His entire demeanor shifted. The vulnerable man who'd shared his painful history disappearing behind a mask of controlled authority. What kind of questions? He asked, already moving toward the door. The kind that suggest our involvement with Miss Martinez hasn't gone unnoticed. Mrs. Romano replied. Tommy thinks we may have been made. Alejandro cursed in what sounded like Italian, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. When he looked at me, I saw something that made my blood turn cold.
Fear.
Not for himself, but for me. Pack a bag, he said quietly. We're leaving in 10 minutes.
What? Why?
What's happening? The Kaczynskis, he said grimly. It seems they've learned about my newest acquisition. The pediatric wing of Brooklyn Children's Hospital felt different when you were walking through it with a dozen armed men trying to look inconspicuous. Alessandro's security team had spread themselves throughout the corridors, some dressed as maintenance workers, others posing as visiting family members, but I could feel their presence like electricity in the air, coiled and ready to spring. Lucas is in room 314. I told Alejandro as we stepped off the elevator. His chemotherapy session should be finishing soon. He nodded, his hand resting lightly on my lower back as we walked. The gesture was possessive, but also protective, and I found myself leaning into his touch, despite every rational part of my brain screaming warnings. 3 days in his world had changed something fundamental inside me, shifting my perspective in ways I wasn't ready to examine too closely. Mommy. Lucas's voice rang out as we approached his room, and my heart clenched at the pure joy in that single word. When I pushed open the door, he was sitting up in the treatment chair, for lines still connected to his port, but color in his cheeks that hadn't been there in months.
Hey, baby.
I rushed to his side, careful not to disturb the tubing as I wrapped him in my arms. He smelled like strawberry shampoo and that antiseptic hospital scent, but underneath it was something else. Health, maybe.
Hope. Look, Mommy.
He held up a tablet displaying some kind of educational game. Miss Jennifer taught me about the solar system. Did you know Jupiter has 79 moons? I did not know that, I said, fighting back tears as I smoothed his dark hair. He looked so much better than when I'd last seen him. Stronger. More like the energetic little boy he'd been before the cancer tried to steal his childhood. Miss Jennifer, this is my mommy. Lucas announced proudly to the nurse who was monitoring his treatment. She works at a hospital, too, but for all the kids, not just me. The nurse, Jennifer apparently, smiled warmly. Your mom and I have spoken on the phone. And this must be Mr. Alessandro. She extended her hand to Alejandro, who had been standing quietly in the doorway. Lucas has told me a lot about you. All good things, I hope, Alejandro said, stepping forward to shake her hand. When he approached Lucas's chair, his entire demeanor softened in a way that made my chest tight. How are you feeling today, champion? Really good, Lucas beamed. Jennifer says my numbers are the best they've been since I got sick, and Dr. Chun showed me pictures of my blood cells on her computer. They look like little fighting soldiers. Alejandro's eyes met mine over Lucas's head, and I saw something there that made my breath catch. Genuine affection for my son. Not the calculated interest of someone playing a part, but real warmth. That's wonderful news, Alejandro said, crouching down to Lucas's eye level. Dr. Chun is one of the best doctors in the world. If she says your soldiers are winning, then they are. Are you my mommy's boyfriend? Lucas asked with the blunt curiosity that only 5-year-olds possessed. Heat flooded my cheeks. Lucas, that's not he's a friend, Alessandro said smoothly. A very good friend who cares about both you and your mommy very much. Before Lucas could ask any more embarrassing questions, Jennifer finished disconnecting his phone and began gathering her supplies. All done for today. You can go home whenever you're ready. Actually, Alessandro said, his voice taking on that careful tone I was learning to recognize. We need to make a slight change to the pickup routine. I was about to ask what he meant when I saw it. A man in a janitor's uniform mopping the same spot in the hallway for the 3rd time. His eyes constantly scanning the area around Lucas's room. But it wasn't one of Alejandro's men. The build was wrong. The movements too tense. Alejandro saw him too. I could tell by the way his posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his hand moving to rest inside his jacket. Miss Jennifer, he said quietly, I need you to take Lucas to the playroom for a few minutes. There's a security concern we need to address. The nurse looked confused, but professional. Of course. Come on, Lucas. Let's go see if they have any new puzzles. But I want to stay with Mommy. Lucas protested, picking up on the sudden tension in the room, even if he didn't understand it. I'll be right behind you, sweetheart. I promised, kissing his forehead. Go with Miss Jennifer. I just need to talk to Alejandro for a minute. Once Lucas was out of earshot, Alejandro spoke into what I now realized was a nearly invisible earpiece. Floor 3 is compromised. I count at least 2 unknowns, possibly more. The response was immediate. I watched through the room's window as his security team began moving with practiced efficiency, converging on positions that would give them clear lines of sight and egress routes. Sophia, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Alejandro said, his voice calm but urgent. We're going to walk to the playroom together. Stay close to my left side. Keep your head down. And if I tell you to get down, you drop immediately. Understood? Fear crawled up my throat like ice water. Who are they? How did they find us? The Kaczynskis have people everywhere, he said grimly. Someone in my organization has been feeding them information. We'll deal with that later. Right now, we need to get you and Lucas out of here safely. We moved through the hospital corridors like we were walking through a minefield. Alejandro's team had formed a loose perimeter around us. But I could see other figures now, men who were trying too hard to look casual, positioning themselves at strategic points throughout the building. The playroom was at the end of a long hallway lined with cheerful murals of cartoon animals. Lucas was sitting at a small table with Jennifer, working on a puzzle of the solar system he'd been learning about. He looked up when we entered, his face lighting up with that infectious smile that never failed to make my heart skip. "Mommy, look. I found all the planets." "That's wonderful, baby," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But we need to go now, okay?" Alejandro was speaking quietly into his earpiece again, coordinating something with his team. When he finished, he approached Lucas with that same gentle demeanor he'd shown before. "Hey, champion, how would you like to go for a ride in a really cool car?" Lucas's eyes widened. "What kind of car?" "The kind with bulletproof windows and engines that go very, very fast." Before Lucas could respond, the lights in the playroom flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that turned shadows into monsters. "That's our cue," Alejandro said, scooping Lucas into his arms in one smooth motion. "Ms. Jennifer, stay here until security gives you the all-clear." The nurse nodded, though her eyes were wide with fear. We moved quickly through corridors that had been transformed by the red emergency lighting into something from a nightmare. Alessandro Unc's men formed a tight formation around us, their weapons now openly displayed. The pretense of subtlety was over. "What's happening?" Lucas asked, his arms tight around Alejandro Unc's neck. "Just a little adventure," Alejandro said calmly, though I could see the tension in his jaw. "Remember how we talked about superheroes? Well, sometimes they have to protect people from bad guys." "Are you a superhero?" Lucas asked with the kind of odd whispered children reserved for discussing Santa Claus. "Something like that." We reached the hospital's loading dock where a convoy of black SUVs waited with engines running. Alejandro's team had cleared the area, but I could see muzzle flashes from upper windows. Someone was shooting at someone, though the bulletproof glass made it impossible to tell who was winning. "Get in," Alessandro ordered, practically throwing me into the middle vehicle while still holding Lucas. "Vincent, we need to move now." The driver, Vincent, apparently, nodded and gunned the engine before Alejandro had even closed the door. We accelerated out of the loading dock like we were fleeing the apocalypse, tires screaming against concrete as we merged into traffic. "Are the bad guys following us?" Lucas asked, his face pressed to the window as he watched the hospital disappear behind us. "Not anymore," Alessandro said with grim satisfaction, checking his phone. "My people made sure of that. I didn't want to know what that meant." As we drove through Queens toward whatever safe house Alessandro had prepared, he made a series of phone calls in rapid-fire Italian. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression that was equal parts apology and determination. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This is exactly what I was trying to prevent by bringing you to the mansion. But someone on my team has been feeding information to the Kaczynskis. Until I find out who nowhere is completely safe." "What does that mean for us?" Alejandro Unc's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that felt natural despite everything. "It means we disappear for a while. Let them think they've won until I can identify the traitor and deal with him permanently." The way he said deal with him sent a chill down my spine. But I found myself nodding anyway, because somewhere between the hospital and this moment, I'd made a choice I hadn't even realized I was making. I trusted him. This dangerous, powerful man who had turned my life upside down. I trusted him to protect my son and me when no one else could. And that terrified me more than any number of Kaczynski assassins ever would. "Mommy," Lucas said sleepily, the adrenaline of our escape giving way to exhaustion. "Is Alejandro going to keep the bad guys away?" I looked at Alejandro at the fierce determination in those dark blue eyes. At the way he held my son like Lucas was something precious that needed protecting. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "I think he is." And as our convoy disappeared into the maze of Queens traffic, I realized I actually believed it. The safe house in Queens turned out to be a modest brick townhouse that looked like every other building on the block. Inside, however, it was fitted with enough technology to run a small military operation. Lucas had fallen asleep during the drive, And Alejandro carried him upstairs to what would be our temporary bedroom while I tried to process how completely my life had derailed. "He's exhausted," Alejandro said quietly when he returned to the living room where I was sitting on a couch that had seen better days. The nurse left his medication schedule. "I've arranged for a pediatric oncologist to make house calls until we can move to more permanent accommodations." "More permanent accommodations?" I repeated, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "You mean we can't go home?" "Not until I identify the leak in my organization." He poured himself a drink from a bottle of whiskey that definitely didn't belong in a safe house. "Someone has been feeding the Kaczynskis information for months, possibly longer, until I root out the traitor." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. This is insane. 2 weeks ago, my biggest worry was making rent. Now I'm living in a safe house because Russian mobsters want to use me as leverage against a man I barely know. "You know me better than most people ever have," Alejandro said. And there was something in his voice that made me look up sharply.
Doi.
"Because right now I'm not sure I know anything at all." He set down his drink and moved to sit across from me, his dark blue eyes intense in the lamplight. "What would you like to know?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Where did I even begin? With the obvious, his criminal empire, the violence that surrounded him like a second skin, or with the more dangerous territory. Why his touch made me feel safer than I had in years. Why the thought of him being hurt made my chest tight with something that felt terrifyingly like more than gratitude. Why pediatric nursing? I asked instead. "When you were investigating me, you must have discovered that I was 2 years into medical school when I got pregnant with Lucas." "I could have been a doctor." Alejandro nodded. "Johns Hopkins pre-med with a focus on pediatric surgery. Your professor said you had extraordinary potential, but I chose Lucas instead." I tucked my feet under me, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. "His father wanted me to handle the situation. Said a baby would ruin both our careers. When I refused, he disappeared. Haven't heard from him since his loss," Alessandro said quietly. "And your son is lucky to have a mother who chose love over ambition." "Some days I wonder if I made the right choice," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "If I'd become a doctor, maybe I could have afforded his treatment without having to borrow money from loan sharks. Maybe I could have given him a better life. You gave him the most important thing, a mother who would sacrifice everything for him." Alejandro leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I never had that. My mother died when I was 8. Car accident on a rainy night. After that, it was just my father and me. And he was so consumed with building the family business that I raised myself more than he did." There was pain in his voice, old and carefully controlled, but still raw enough to make my heart ache for the lonely little boy he'd been. "Is that why you do this?" I gestured vaguely around the safe house. "The protection, the control, making sure everyone around you is safe." Partly he was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass, but mostly because I learned that the world is full of predators. And the only way to protect the people you care about is to be more dangerous than anything that might threaten them. The admission settled between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Because hidden in those words was an implication that made my pulse quicken, that he cared about me, about Lucas, that we weren't just obligations or strategic assets, but people he genuinely wanted to protect. "I need some air," I said abruptly, standing and heading for what I hoped was a back door. The small garden behind the townhouse was overgrown and neglected, but it offered the illusion of privacy and space I desperately needed. I sat on a wooden bench that wobbled under my weight and tried to make sense of the chaos my life had become. The back door opened behind me, and I knew without looking that Alessandro had followed. He moved to stand beside the bench, not sitting but close enough that I could smell his cologne. That expensive masculine scent that had become oddly comforting. "In my line of work," he said quietly, "emotional attachments are considered weaknesses, vulnerabilities that enemies can exploit." "Then why risk it?" I asked, not looking at him. "Because some things are worth the risk." The simple statement made my breath catch. When I finally looked up, he was watching me with an expression that was equal parts hunger and tenderness. a combination that should have been impossible, but somehow worked on his sharp features. Alessandro. I started, but he shook his head. You don't have to say anything. I know the situation is complicated enough without adding personal feelings to the mix. And if the feelings are already there, the words slipped out before I could stop them, and I immediately wanted to take them back. His eyes darkened, and he sat down beside me on the bench, close enough that our thighs touched. Then we're both in more danger than I thought. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Alejandro glanced at the screen and cursed under his breath. I have to take this, he said, answering with a sharp,
What?
I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I watched Alejandro's face go through a series of expressions. Surprise, anger, and finally something that looked like cold fury. Are you certain? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. How long has this been going on? Another pause. Then bring him to the warehouse. I want to handle this personally. He ended the call and sat staring at his phone for a long moment before speaking. They found the leak, he said finally.
Who was it?
Alejandro's jaw tightened. Tommy Moroni, my lieutenant for 10 years. Someone I trusted with my life, with my secrets, with knowledge of everyone under my protection. The betrayal in his voice was devastating to hear. This wasn't just about business or territory. This was personal. Someone Alejandro had considered family had been selling information to his enemies, putting not just him at risk, but everyone who depended on him for protection, including me, including Lucas. What happens now? I asked. Now Tommy pays for his betrayal.
Alessandro stood.
And I could see the transformation happening in real time. The man who had shared his painful history with me, disappearing behind the mask of someone capable of terrible things. And then we make sure the Kaczynskis understand the cost of threatening what's mine. The possessive pronoun sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. I should go, he continued, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. Vincent will stay here with you and Lucas. There are 2 other men positioned around the block, and the house has a state-of-the-art security system. You'll be safe. And you? The question came out more vulnerable than I'd intended. Alejandro paused at the back door, looking over his shoulder at me. I'll come back, he said simply.
I promise you that.
After he left, I sat in the garden for a long time, listening to the distant sounds of city traffic and trying to process everything that had happened. Somewhere upstairs, my 5-year-old son was sleeping peacefully, unaware that his life had become the center of a war between criminals who saw him as nothing more than leverage. But to Alejandro, Lucas was more than that. I'd seen it in the way he'd carried my son out of the hospital. The gentleness in his voice when he'd promised Lucas that the bad guys couldn't hurt him anymore. Alessandro Toretti, a man who commanded an empire built on fear and violence, had fallen for a sick little boy's courage and innocence, just like he'd fallen for his mother's desperation and determination to save that little boy at any cost. When I finally went back inside, Vincent was in the kitchen cleaning a gun with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done it thousands of times before. He'll be back, Vincent said without looking up. Mr. Toretti doesn't make promises he can't keep. How can you be so sure? Vincent looked at me then, and I was surprised to see something like amusement in his eyes, because in 10 years of working for him, I've never seen him care about anything the way he cares about you and your son. And Alejandro Toretti would burn down half of Brooklyn before he'd let anything happen to the people he protects. I went upstairs to check on Lucas, who was sleeping curled around a stuffed dinosaur that I didn't recognize. Probably something Alessandro had thought to bring from the hospital. My son looked so peaceful, so normal that it was hard to believe we were hiding from people who wanted to use him as a weapon. As I sat watching Lucas sleep, I realized that somewhere in the space between desperation and safety, between gratitude and something deeper, I'd stopped fighting the truth that had been building inside me for days. I was falling in love with Alejandro Toretti, and that terrified me more than any threat the Kaczynskis could make. Alejandro didn't come back that night or the next day. By the time 48 hours had passed without word, I was pacing the safe house like a caged animal, jumping at every creak of the old building's settling bones. Vincent maintained his post with professional calm, but I caught him checking his phone more frequently as the hours stretched on. This is normal, he assured me when he found me staring out the living room window for the 100th time. Sometimes these things take longer than expected. What things? I demanded. What exactly is he doing? Vincent's expression shuddered. Nothing you need to worry about. But I was worrying. I was worrying about what Alejandro might be doing to Tommy Maroney, what the Kaczynskis might be planning in retaliation. And most dangerously, what it meant that my heart clenched with genuine fear every time I thought about Alessandro being hurt. Lucas, thankfully, seemed oblivious to the tension. He'd adapted to our temporary living situation with the resilience that only children possessed, turning the safe house into his personal playground while maintaining his medication schedule with the help of Dr. Patterson, the pediatric oncologist Alessandro had somehow convinced to make house calls. "Mommy, when is Alejandro coming back?" Lucas asked on the third morning, looking up from the tablet where he was playing an educational game about marine biology. "Soon, sweetheart," I said, hoping I wasn't lying. "Good. I want to show him the whale facts I learned." The simple statement twisted something in my chest. In less than a week, Alejandro had somehow become important to my son, not just as a protector, but as someone Lucas genuinely cared about. Someone he looked up to and wanted to impress, just like his mother. I was still processing that uncomfortable truth when my phone rang. Alessandro Unc's number flashed on the screen, and I answered so quickly I nearly dropped the device.
Sophia.
His voice was rough, like he'd been shouting or hadn't slept. "Are you and Lucas safe?" "We're fine." "Where are you?" Vincent said. Vincent doesn't know everything. There was noise in the background, voices, machinery, something that sounded like construction. "I need you to listen carefully. In about 6 hours, Viktor Kaczynski is going to make a move. I've disrupted his operation significantly, and he's going to respond by trying to take what he thinks I value most." Ice flooded my veins. Yes, but I'm not going to let that happen." His voice hardened. "Vincent has instructions to move you to a secondary location if I'm not back by 400 p.m. You're to go with him without argument, no matter what you might hear or see." "Alessandra, what's going on? What did you do?" Silence stretched across the connection, filled only by that background noise that I was beginning to think might be screaming. "I did what was necessary," he said finally. "Tommy is no longer a problem. Neither are the 3 Kaczynski soldiers he'd been feeding information to, but Viktor knows I'm coming for him now. And desperate men do desperate things." "Come back," I whispered. "Whatever you're planning, whatever you think you need to do, just come back. We'll figure out another way." "There is no other way, Sophia." His voice softened slightly. "This ends now, one way or another. But I need to know you and Lucas are safe before I can finish it." The line went quiet, and for a moment, I thought he'd hung up. Then, "I love you." The words hit me like a physical blow, stopping my breath in my throat. Not just because he'd said them, but because of how he'd said them, like a goodbye. "Alessandro, I love you," he repeated stronger this time. "And I love that little boy who asks about whale facts and calls me a superhero. I need you to know that in case." "Don't." Tears were streaming down my face now. "Don't you dare say goodbye to me. Then, don't let this be goodbye." His voice was steady now, controlled. "When this is over, when you're both safe, I want to take you home to our home. I want to wake up next to you every morning and help Lucas with his homework and maybe give him a little brother or sister to boss around." The future he was painting was beautiful and terrifying and completely impossible, except that I found myself wanting it with a desperation that rivaled my need to keep Lucas alive. "Come back to us," I said through my tears. "Whatever it takes, just come back." "I'll try," he promised. "But if I don't, you will." I was crying openly now, not caring that Vincent was watching from the kitchen doorway. "You have to because I love you too, you insane, dangerous, impossible man. And I'm not raising your son without his father." The silence that followed was different, charged with something that felt like hope rather than despair. My son, Alessandro Unc's voice was barely above a whisper. "If you want him, if you come back to us. Lucas asked me yesterday when you were going to officially become his daddy. And I realized I didn't have an answer because I'd been too scared to admit what I already knew. Sophia, I choose you. I interrupted, the words rushing out before I could lose my nerve. I choose this life, this crazy, dangerous world you live in. I choose you, and whatever comes with loving you, because the alternative is living without you, and I can't do that anymore.
Jesus, Sophia.
His voice was rough with emotion. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want to be yours officially and permanently, and in every way that matters. I'm saying that if you die on me before we have a chance to figure out what this is between us, I will never forgive you. Another long silence. Then a sound that might have been laughter or a sob. Hold that thought. Alejandro said, I'm coming home. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone through tears that I couldn't seem to stop. Vincent approached slowly, like I might bolt if he moved too fast. He'll be back, Vincent said quietly. I've never seen Alessandro Tretti lose a fight, and he's never had more reason to win one. What if he doesn't? The question came out small and broken. What if Victor Kaczynski is smarter or faster or just luckier? Then we make sure you and Lucas disappear so completely that no one will ever find you. Vincent said with absolute certainty. That's what Alessandro would want, and that's what we'll do. But it won't come to that. How can you be so sure? Vincent smiled. And for the first time since I'd met him, he looked almost human. Because Alessandro just got something worth living for. And men like him don't give up things worth living for without a fight that shakes the foundations of the earth. Over the next few hours, I try to keep myself busy by helping Lucas with his studies and reviewing his medical charts with Dr. Patterson, but my mind kept drifting to Alejandro, to the future he'd painted for us, to the impossible choice I'd made to embrace a life I'd never imagined wanting. At 3:30, Vincent's phone rang. He answered with his usual TUR.
Yeah.
But his expression changed as he listened. When he hung up, he looked at me with something that might have been relief. Boss is 20 minutes out, he said. He wants me to tell you that Victor Kaczynski is no longer a problem. What does that mean? It means, a familiar voice said from the front door, that no one will ever threaten my family again. I turned to see Alejandro standing in the doorway, and my heart stopped. He was alive, whole, and looking at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. His suit was torn and stained with something I didn't want to identify. There was a cut above his left eyebrow, and his knuckles were scraped raw. But he was here. He was home. Alejandro. Lucas launched himself across the room, and Alessandro caught him in an embrace that made my chest tight with emotion. Hey there, champion. Did you take care of your mom while I was gone? I did. And I learned about blue whales. Did you know they're the biggest animals that ever lived? I did not know that, Alessandro said solemnly. You'll have to tell me all about it. Over Lucas's head, Alessandro Unk's eyes met mine. And I saw everything I needed to see there. Love, relief, and a promise that this was just the beginning. Sophia, he said quietly, setting Lucas down, but keeping one hand on my son's shoulder. We need to talk later, I said, moving toward him with purpose. Right now, I just need to do this. I kissed him in front of Vincent and Dr. Patterson and my 5-year-old son, and I didn't care who was watching. Alejandro Unk's arms came around me immediately, holding me against him like he was afraid I might disappear. I kept my promise, he whispered against my lips. I knew you would, I whispered back. Now keep the rest of them. I should have known it wasn't over. In the world Alejandro inhabited, nothing was ever truly finished until every threat was buried 6 feet under. That lesson came crashing down on us 3 days after Victor Kaczynski's death, when Dr. Patterson failed to show up for Lucas's scheduled appointment. He's never late, I told Alessandro, pacing the living room of our safe house while checking my phone for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Never. Something's wrong. Alessandro was already on his phone, speaking rapid Italian to what sounded like multiple people. When he finished his calls, his expression was grimmer than I'd seen since the hospital incident.
Dr.
Patterson was taken from his apartment this morning, he said quietly. Professional job. No signs of struggle, no witnesses. Security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. Taken by who? But even as I asked, I knew the answer. Victor had a brother, Dmitry Kaczynski. He's been operating out of Boston for the past decade, but apparently family loyalty runs deeper than territorial boundaries. My blood turned to ice. He is Lucas's doctor. It's more than that, Sophia. Alejandro moved to the window, checking something in the street below. Dmitry doesn't just want revenge for his brother. He wants to send a message to every other family that crossing the Kaczynskis has consequences. Taking Dr. Patterson was just the opening move. As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. The message was simple and terrifying. Pier 47, come alone. Bring the boy. You have 2 hours. Alejandro Unk's phone buzzed simultaneously with what was clearly the same message. His jaw tightened as he read it. And when he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes that made my chest clench with fear. They have Dr. Patterson at the pier, he said. They want you and Lucas in exchange for his life. We can't. The words came out as barely more than a whisper. Alessandro, we can't trade Lucas, for we're not trading anyone. He cut me off, his voice carrying that deadly calm I'd learned to recognize. But we're going to that pier. You just said they want us to come alone. They want you to think you're coming alone. Alessandro was already moving toward the stairs, probably to check on Lucas. There's a difference. Over the next hour, I watched Alejandro coordinate what appeared to be a small army. Men arrived at the safe house in ones and twos, each carrying cases that I suspected contained enough firepower to level a city block. Vincent briefed them on the pier's layout while Alejandro studied satellite images on his laptop. The pier extends about 200 yards into the harbor, Vincent explained, pointing to various positions on a detailed map. 3 ways in by land, 1 by water. If they're smart, they'll have snipers positioned here, here, and here. They're not just smart, Alejandro said grimly. Dmitry Kaczynski spent 10 years building a reputation in Boston. He doesn't make mistakes. Then how do we get Lucas out of there safely? I asked. Alejandro looked up from his laptop. And I saw something in his expression that made my heart skip. We don't take Lucas to the pier.
What?
They said bring the boy. They didn't specify which boy. Alejandro's smile was cold and calculating. Vincent's nephew is about Lucas's size. Right age from a distance, especially if he's wearing Lucas's jacket. Understanding dawned along with a mixture of relief and terror. You want to use a decoy. I want to give Dmitry what he expects to see while keeping the people I love out of the line of fire. Alessandro stood and pulled me into his arms. But it means you'll still have to go to that pier, Sophia. I can't risk using a double for you. They'll have photographs. They'll know. I'm going with you anyway, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded.
Dr.
Patterson risked his safety to help Lucas. I'm not letting him die because of us. Alejandro Unk's eyes searched my face. You understand what you're agreeing to? This isn't just dangerous. If something goes wrong, if my plan fails, then we face it together. I reached up to touch the cut above his eyebrow, which was already healing. That's what partners do, right? They face things together. Partners, he repeated, and something in his voice made my chest tight. Is that what we are? I think we're a lot more than that, I said softly. But we can figure out labels later. Right now, let's go save Dr. Patterson and end this once and for all. The drive to the pier took 25 minutes through traffic that seemed designed to test my sanity. I sat in the passenger seat of Alejandro's Bentley, wearing a wire so thin I could barely feel it, and a bulletproof vest that felt like it weighed 100 pounds, Vincent's nephew, Tony, a brave 13-year-old who looked remarkably like Lucas from a distance, sat in the back seat wearing my son's favorite dinosaur jacket. Remember, Alejandro said for the 10th time. You follow my lead exactly. If I tell you to get down, you drop immediately. If I tell you to run, you run and don't look back. And if something happens to you, nothing's going to happen to me. He squeezed my hand briefly. I have too much to live for now. Pier 47 stretched into New York Harbor like a concrete finger pointing toward the Statue of Liberty. At 700 p.m., it should have been bustling with tourists and evening fishermen. Instead, it was eerily deserted, except for a single figure standing at the far end.
Dr.
Patterson, tied to one of the support pillars with what looked like enough rope to secure a boat. I count 6 hostiles. Vincent's voice crackled through Alejandro Unk's earpiece. 3 on the pier itself, 2 in the warehouse behind you, 1 in the water on a speedboat. Dmitry Kaczynski is the tall one standing next to the doctor.
Copy that.
Alejandro checked his weapon one final time. Remember, nobody moves until I give the signal. I want Dmitry alive long enough to tell me who else was involved in this operation. We walked onto the pier hand in hand, Tony trailing slightly behind us with his hood up and his head down. To anyone watching from a distance, we looked exactly like what Dmitry expected. A desperate mother and her protector bringing a sick child to trade for a doctor's life.
Stop there.
A voice called out when we were about 50 yards from the end of the pier. Dmitry Kaczynski stepped into view, and I was struck by how much he resembled his dead brother. Tall, pale, with a kind of cold eyes that suggested he'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with violence. You have something that belongs to me, Alessandro called back. And you killed something that belonged to me, Dmitry replied. I think that makes us even. But family honor demands satisfaction. Let Dr. Patterson go. This is between you and me. Dmitry laughed, the sound carrying across the water like breaking glass. You think this is about you? This is about respect, about showing every family from here to Moscow what happens when you cross the Kaczynskis. Your brother threatened my family, Alejandro said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. He died because he forgot that some things are worth more than territory or respect. Family is worth more than anything, Dmitry agreed. Which is why you're going to watch yours die before I put a bullet in your head. That's when everything went wrong. The speedboat in the water opened fire first. Automatic weapons chattering as bullets chewed up the concrete around our feet. Alejandro threw himself over me, driving us both to the deck as his men responded from their concealed positions. The pier erupted into chaos. Muzzle flashes strobing in the growing darkness. The sharp crack of sniper rifles. Shouts in multiple languages. Stay down. Alejandro shouted over the gunfire. But I was already moving. Dr. Patterson was still tied to that pillar. And Dmitry was using him as a human shield while returning fire with a pistol that looked like it could stop a tank. The doctor, I yelled, pointing toward the end of the pier. Alejandro followed my gaze and cursed. Vincent, I need suppressive fire on the boat. The speedboat exploded in a ball of orange flame as someone, presumably Vincent, put a rocket into its engine. But Dmitry was still alive, still using Dr. Patterson as cover, and still very much a threat. Tony, get behind that crate and stay there. Alessandra ordered, then looked at me with eyes that blazed with determination. I'm going to end this. Whatever happens, don't follow me. Before I could stop him, he was running toward the end of the pier in a crouch, using overturned benches and trash cans for cover. Dmitry saw him coming and adjusted his position, putting Dr. Patterson between himself and Alejandro Unk's approach. That's when I made a decision that probably saved all our lives. I stood up. Dmitry, I shouted, stepping into the open where every remaining Kaczynski gunman could see me. Let Dr. Patterson go, and take me instead. Sophia, get down. Alessandra Unk's voice was raw with panic. But Dmitry had already shifted his attention to me, probably seeing an easier target than the man who'd killed his brother. He released Dr. Patterson and raised his weapon, pointing it directly at my chest. What he didn't see was Tony slipping around behind him, moving with the quiet grace of someone who'd clearly inherited the family business. The 13-year-old produced a knife from somewhere in Lucas's jacket and drove it into the back of Dmitry's leg. Dmitry screamed and spun, his shot going wide. Alejandro used the distraction to close the distance, tackling the Russian to the pier's deck in a move that sent both men dangerously close to the edge. They fought with the desperate intensity of men who knew only one of them would walk away. Dmitry was larger, but Alejandro fought with the fury of someone protecting his family. They rolled across the concrete, each trying to gain control of Dmitry's gun. The weapon discharged twice more, and I held my breath until I saw Aleandro roll away from Dimitri's suddenly still form. The Russian lay motionless, blood pooling beneath his head as waves lapped against the pier supports below. "It's over," Aleandro said, standing slowly and looking around at the sudden silence. "It's finally over." I ran to him, throwing my arms around his neck despite the blood on his clothes and the exhaustion in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious." He held me tight, his face buried in my hair. "Are you okay, Tony?" "We're fine." I pulled back to look at him, needing to see his face. "Is it really over?" Alessandro nodded, then looked past me to where Dr. Patterson was being freed by Vincent. "The Kaczynski family dies, with Dimitri. No more brothers. No more cousins seeking revenge.
We can go home now."
Home. The word carried more weight than it ever had before. "All of us?" I asked, thinking of Lucas back at the safe house. "All of us?" Aleandro confirmed. "Our family." 18 months after the pier, I stood before a full-length mirror in St. Patrick's Cathedral's bridal suite. The woman reflected there was utterly transformed from the weary nurse who had once gazed at her reflection with fear in her heart. My wedding gown, a magnificent custom creation, cascaded around me in silk and seed pearls, its beauty an emblem of how far my life had come. Behind me, Lucas, impossibly dapper in his child-sized tuxedo, beamed. His dark hair was styled like Aleandro's, and his green eyes, now alight with vibrant health, held the pure joy of a 6-year-old. 6 months had passed since Dr. Chin delivered the life-altering news. Lucas was officially in remission. The pioneering treatment, generously funded by Aleandro, had triumphed. My son was thriving, and the most influential man in New York was now Papa to him, a title Lucas bestowed with complete love and trust. Maria, Aleandro's cousin, gave my cathedral-length veil a final adjustment. "Mrs. Toretti," she announced softly, "it's time." Sophia Toretti. In mere minutes, that would be my name. The wife of the East Coast's most formidable man, the stepmother to an intricate empire woven from calculated strength and strategic alliances. A year prior, such a notion would have paralyzed me with terror. Now, it resonated as a profound sense of belonging. The cathedral teamed with representatives from every prominent family from Boston to Miami, their presence marking not just a wedding, but a significant consolidation of power. Aleandro Toretti was transcending his role as the head of his father's organization to become something akin to royalty in this clandestine world I had chosen to embrace. Yet, as I traversed the long aisle, my thoughts were far from the intricate dance of politics or territory, or the subtle, deferential nods from men whose commands could end lives. My gaze was fixed solely on the man awaiting me at the altar, radiant in a tuxedo that seemed divinely tailored. His deep blue eyes held an intensity that quickened my pulse, seeing me as both his salvation and his beautiful undoing. He looked as if he couldn't quite believe I was real, that I was walking toward him willingly, that against all odds, we had navigated our way to this singular moment. Lucas, clutching the rings on a silk cushion, walked proudly beside me, his concentration profound. Upon reaching the altar, he flashed Aleandro a wide grin. "Papa, you look fancy," he whispered, loud enough for a significant portion of the congregation to hear. Aleandro's genuine, resonant laugh filled the space as he knelt to Lucas's level. "As do you, champion. Ready to make this official? Are you going to be my real daddy now?" Lucas inquired, his voice echoing with perfect childhood innocence. "I've been your real daddy since the day I met you," Aleandro replied softly, and I noticed tears welling in the eyes of more than one seasoned man in the front pews. "Now, it's just going to be legal." The ceremony itself unfolded in a beautiful haze of Latin rites and age-old traditions. Yet, the memory I would forever cherish was the instant Aleandro slid his grandmother's ring onto my finger, a luminous emerald cradled by diamonds, testament to generations of Toretti perseverance. "With this ring," he vowed, his voice steady and unwavering, "I thee wed, and I promise to love, honor, and protect you and our son for as long as I draw breath. Our son. Not my son, nor his stepson, but ours. The words settled into my chest like a long-awaited homecoming. When the priest pronounced us husband and wife, Alejandro's kiss was tender and sacred, a profound promise more than a mere claim. Beneath its softness, however, I could feel the ardent, barely restrained desire that had grown between us over months. Tonight, we would finally unite, truly, in every meaningful way. The reception at the Waldorf Astoria was a breathtaking spectacle, a ballroom transformed into a setting from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering rainbow patterns across tables adorned with floral arrangements that likely surpassed the cost of many people's automobiles. The guest list read like an exclusive directory of organized crime, but tonight they were simply family and friends, celebrating love. "How does it feel to be the Queen of New York?" Vincent asked during the father-son dance, a tradition Alejandro had insisted upon for Lucas. I watched my husband twirl our son across the dance floor, both of them sharing laughter only they could hear, and a warmth, profound and complete, settled in my heart. Like the luckiest woman alive, I confessed, the truth resounding in my voice. Later, during our first dance as husband and wife, Alejandro held me close and murmured against my ear, "Any regrets?" I surveyed the ballroom, taking in the faces around us, some openly warm, others keenly observant, yet all imbued with a newfound respect. These individuals now looked to me as Alejandro's wife, their first lady. My future would involve overseeing charities that subtly served as financial fronts, hosting dinners where territorial disputes were quietly resolved over exquisite wines, and raising my son in a world where latent violence was an ever-present undercurrent, where bodyguards were as commonplace as birthday parties and soccer games. "None," I replied, surprised by the absolute conviction in my own voice. "Only that it took us so long to arrive here." Alejandro's soft chuckle rumbled against my hair. 3 years later, I sat in the polished boardroom of the Toretti Foundation, a legitimate philanthropic organization dedicated to providing medical care for underprivileged children throughout the city. This was my vision, actualized through Alejandro's formidable resources and network. "The new pediatric wing at Mount Sinai is officially operational," reported Dr. Chun, now serving as our esteemed medical director. "We've already served 47 children this month, including 12 pro bono cases." "And the research grant applications?" I inquired, reviewing the quarterly reports spread across the conference table. "Approved," confirmed Michael Romano, our CFO and Mrs. Romano's son. "The Martinez Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Research is fully funded for the next 5 years." The Martinez Foundation, bearing my maiden name, was Alejandro's wedding gift to me, a $10 million initial endowment, with a pledge of boundless funding as long as children needed help, ensuring no parent would ever face the agonizing choice between their child's life and financial ruin. Excellent. What about the new clinic in Queens? As we discussed plans for expanding our medical outreach, a familiar flutter stirred in my abdomen. 7 months along, our daughter, Isabella Toretti, named after Alejandro's grandmother and the flower I'd held when we first met, was making her vibrant presence known. "You should be resting," Alejandro commented from the doorway, having arrived to escort me to lunch as he did every day. Dr. Patterson said, "Light activity is fine," I interjected, rising carefully and accepting Alejandro's steadying hand. "Besides, someone has to keep track of all the good we're doing with your ill-gotten gains." "Legitimately invested gains," Alejandro corrected with a smile that had only grown more captivating over the years. "Some of us have gone respectable, Mrs. Toretti." It was true. Gradually, Alejandro's business interests had shifted, focusing more on legitimate ventures, real estate development, restaurant chains, technological investments. He still commanded profound respect from the old families, but now as a venerated elder statesman rather than an active participant in their clandestine dealings. The transition hadn't been simple, but the impetus of protecting his family had driven changes that years of law enforcement pressure never could have achieved.
Mama. Papa.
Lucas burst through the boardroom doors, radiating the boundless energy of a healthy 9-year-old. He had grown tall and strong, his past battle with cancer now a distant memory, kept in check by routine checkups. "How was school today, champion?" Alejandro asked, effortlessly lifting Lucas despite his increasing size.
Great.
"I got an A on my marine biology presentation. Did you know some whales can live for over 200 years? "I did not know that," Alejandro replied with the same patient attentiveness he had shown to Lucas's facts since that pivotal day in the hospital. "You'll have to tell me all about it over dinner." As we drove home through the tranquil Long Island countryside, Lucas chattered animatedly about his day, while Alejandro listened with the same focused intensity he typically reserved for crucial business meetings. I reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought us to this moment. From that desperate, terrifying night in the industrial district to this scene of perfect domestic contentment, it seemed almost surreal that it was the same life. "What are you thinking about?" Alejandro asked, sensing my pensive silence. "Just all of this," I replied, gesturing vaguely at our luxurious SUV, at the discreet security detail following at a respectful distance, at the incredible life we had forged together. "Sometimes I can barely believe it's real." "It is real," Alejandro assured me, his hand finding mine across the center console. "And it's ours. Every facet of it. The good, the complicated, the beautiful.
Ours."
That evening, after Lucas had been tucked into bed with a new book on ocean life, Alejandro and I sat on our terrace, overlooking the sprawling gardens where our son played daily. The sun dipped below the horizon over the Sound, painting the sky in breathtaking hues of gold and crimson, a sight that once might have brought tears to my eyes, but now only deepened my perfect happiness. "Any regrets?" Alejandro asked, echoing his question from our wedding night. I gently guided his hand to my rounded belly, where our daughter was performing what felt like tiny acrobatics. "Only that we can't go back and whisper to that terrified, desperate woman in Brooklyn that night, to tell her that everything would turn out more wonderfully than she ever dared to dream. She wouldn't have believed us," Alejandro said with a knowing smile. "No," I agreed, laughing softly. "She definitely wouldn't have." In the distance, Lucas's joyful laughter drifted on the evening breeze as he played with the neighbor's dog in our meticulously maintained garden. Security guards patrolled the perimeter, their weapons discreetly concealed beneath expensive suits. My husband's empire continued its evolution, generating wealth through increasingly legitimate means. And within me, our daughter kicked enthusiastically, eager to join the wonderfully strange, perfectly unique family we had created. I was Sophia Toretti, wife to New York's most influential man, mother to children who would grow up enveloped in protection, shielded from forces they would never have to comprehend. I commanded respect from individuals who had once viewed me as nothing more than a desperate single mother pleading for mercy. And in this life, I had discovered a happiness I never knew was possible.